JP, we had you on APTN in Focus last year. You had said it was on your wish list to have 5% of government contracts go to Indigenous businesses. How did this make its way onto the Liberal platform?
Well, I'd like to think that CCAB had a strong role in getting the 5% target to the Liberal platform. Of course, there are a lot of Indigenous entrepreneurs out there that are consistently looking for more opportunities and prodding the government and private sector for access to more bid opportunities. Now, there's been definitely a lot of emphasis on the capacity, and I think that's where CCAB's come in. We had talked about our cutting-edge research, which is the best in the world on an Indigenous business economy, and it's one of the things that CCAB does really well. So as you know, in this country, we've got the storyline of a strong Indigenous economy supported by many entrepreneurs from coast to coast to coast, competing in every sector. And I think the report that we just launched this year is around net capacity of Aboriginal businesses to meet federal spend. And we're actually able to prove that our net capacity is over 24%. So right now the feds are spending under 1% a year, usually, sometimes as low as 0.32%, which is not enough. And so it's great to see the Liberal platform pick this up as one of their ideas as far as advancing the Indigenous economy.
So you're doing about 1% of government contracts. You've done a study that's backed by data that shows you could do 24% of the contracts. You got a 5% guarantee target from the Liberals. Where do the other parties stand?
We actually haven't heard from the other parties as far as economy goes, but the Conservatives typically talk about business and economy, so I think this is a natural fit for them. The NDP and the Greens haven't heard much, but they're generally very supportive of Indigenous people, and I hope that they see this as a progressive policy step forward. Essentially, we have a stronger Indigenous economy. We have a stronger Canada.
Okay, explain to us what this increase would mean to Indigenous businesses, and then explain what it would mean to, what good news it means for Indigenous businesses. How does that reflect into the general economy in terms of good news?
Sure, that's a great question, Melissa. So, our people are asking all the time for handshakes, not handouts. Business is a handshake. Let me give you one prime example, and I often refer to this one where, Mark Little was my previous co-chair on our procurement champions, and Mark and I went to the Parliament Hill last fall to talk about the importance of procurement. And Mark, my company, Suncor, spends 10 times what you do, federal government, a year on Indigenous entrepreneurs. So, Suncor's targeting 5%. Last year they spent $700 million, and when we look at the total contributions, or at least the total contract value in Alberta as an example of over $3.3 billion spent on Indigenous entrepreneurs in that province, we see some significant output. So if you look at a community like Fort McKay First Nation, their community members are earning on average $73,500 a year, and we think that it can actually be higher this year. You compare that to the average Canadian, around $38,000, or the average Albertan, to put that in geographic perspective. That's significant, and so you know that the socioeconomic indicators in that community are starting to point in the right direction as a result of an economy. If the federal government were to target 5%, and it was great to see the Liberals put that on their platform, that would contribute about $1 billion to our Indigenous entrepreneurs across the country. If municipal, provincial, territorial, and federal governments were targeting 5%, we would see a net increase to our Indigenous economy of about $23 billion. You combine that with the private sector, we're nearing in a $100 billion economy when you put in equity positions on projects that are happening across the country. But procurement is absolutely fundamental because it supports an entrepreneur, which supports his or her family, which supports a community and the region.
Well, and give us a very quick rundown of some stats that people might not know in terms of how Indigenous business is doing in this country.
Yeah, I mean, there's 54,000 plus Indigenous businesses that are operating in pretty much every sector of the country. One of the interesting figures that we were able to determine is that, and it's another 24%er, is that our people have twice the propensity of the Indigenous SMEs in this country to export. So that's a really amazing indicator when you think about our business savvy. Internationally, we're able to figure out how to get our goods and services to market at a global scale. The other thing is that our Indigenous entrepreneurs are 9 times as likely to start a business. And I think sometimes that's out of necessity, but I think that goes to our true spirit as Indigenous people, as Canada's first entrepreneurs. We all know that there's a rich history when our communities came together and the newcomers first came together, leveraging our business know-how. So now the opportunity in Canada is to actually exercise that in a modern context. So our entrepreneurs are growing every day and making significant contributions to our economy.
Isn't it something like $31 billion contributed to Canada's GDP? I think I read that somewhere.
That's right. Back in 2016, a TD Market report, we partnered with them to produce that number, and it was about, you're absolutely right, Melissa, $31 billion in 2016 being contributed to Canada's GDP. We're circling a background on that number, and I couldn't tell you exactly, but I believe in my heart that we're significantly above that number. Even though some sectors like oil and gas, or sometimes parts of the mining sector, forestry sector, even though the sectors are being a little more challenged these days, we're starting to see a resurgence and of these companies actually using Indigenous entrepreneurs to add to their bottom line, because what they're finding is that when they procure from a local Indigenous business, they're not only adding know-how and expertise to their company, but they're also adding certainty. And in this country, certainty is challenging these days, but our people can bring a lot of that to the table.
Well, JP, I always enjoy talking to you. We don't necessarily cover enough Indigenous business news here on APTN, so when I get to catch up with you, I really appreciate what you have to add. And hopefully we see this on some other election platforms too before we all go vote.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to, one more little point, and that's like, everybody in this country, doesn't matter what your corporation is or who you are as an individual, you have purchasing power. I just spent the last week with Indigenous Women Leadership Summit. I was the only man in the whole conference of 250 incredible Indigenous women. You know, Jen Harper, Cheekbone Beauty, we all are looking up to her for her leadership. And, you know, beauty products, Birch Hill Coffee in Sudbury. You can go anywhere and you can find an Indigenous good or service. So it's about shifting the way that we do it, because it makes significant impact, and we're across sectors. It's an incredibly wonderful story.
I love it. Thanks again so much for joining us.
Melissa.